Welcome to the Cosmic Dispatch, a show about bodies, celestial and earthbound, time, experience, and the relationship between all of them. I'm your host, Cory Nakasue, and good afternoon on this March 26th. How's everybody doing? Wow, do I have a special treat for you? And I mean, it's also a special treat for me. Today, we are having an Astrologers Roundtable, and I'm joined by some astrologers that I hold in very high esteem, who all have different backgrounds and perspectives and expertise. And I invited them here because this month's astrology was so packed with so much movement. And we had a lot of ingresses and tense aspects to cover. But we also had some more monumental shifts that I didn't have a chance to do as deep a dive as I would have liked to. So yeah, I really wanted to give Pisces and Aries their due, along with the lunations and all the rest of it. So we are going to tackle some of these more monumental shifts today. And this week is a good week to do this because relatively, this week is a little more quiet, relatively being the operative word. But I will ask my friends to weigh in on this week's astro weather as well. And I can't wait to hear what they have to say. And before I introduce this deeply talented crew, I just want to remind you that you can share your astrological experiences and musings, ask questions, and give us show and guest recommendations by emailing us at thecosmicdispatch@gmail.com. And you can keep up with all of the Cosmic Dispatch content on our Instagram. And if you'd like to recommend yourself, please do. If you have a project you'd like to promote, let us know. Mandy will be on the other end to collect your info and questions. And you can also sign up for our monthly newsletter, which includes horoscopes, moon reports, info about workshops, and consultation schedules. Okay, so with all that being said, let's do this. My guests today are Hamade, Nicholas Polimenakos, Sasha Ravitch, and Nate Speare. And I'm going to ask all of you to introduce yourselves because that would be entirely too much talking for me. So we're going to go in alphabetical order by last name, which would mean that we'd start with Jay. How you doing, Jay?
I'm doing well. It's pretty rare that I get first dibs when it comes to alphabetical order with an H. That rarely happens. But thank you for having me. Thank you for having me back. I love being on this show with you. I am an artist, an interdisciplinary artist, an astrologer, although I wear that label tenuously at best, I would say. Looking for a better label. I know that Sasha uses astrologer. I'm still looking for mine. Not sure what that is. I also write and teach, and I'd say that's about the gist of it.
All right, so that would mean next is Nicholas. How you
Yes,
doing?
thank you. This is kind of funny because usually the first day of school is always weird when it came to my last name. So everyone would look back and like, because no one ever pronounced it correctly. And thank you for pronouncing it correctly. My name is Nicholas Polimenakos, aka Sparkles of Gold. I'm an astrologer now for a long time. I don't know if I want to even date it, but I've been involved in astrology, and I've also been involved in the astrological world behind the scenes, putting on conferences and doing other interesting things. That includes NORWAC for the last 14 years in different ways and models and other things. I'm also, let's not forget, I'm a human being first and foremost, which means I'm complex, but like to keep things simple if possible.
All right. And then next we have Sasha. Welcome, Sasha.
Thanks so much for having me back. I feel like I am much better at introducing ideas or planets or stars than I am usually myself. But I self-identify as a practitioner of stellar witchcraft and an astrologer. I am also still looking for the better word, but that's the one that we've landed on right now that feels a little bit more accurate than I would say like a quote unquote astrologer. But all of my astrologer friends say I'm still an astrologer. So that means something too. I predominantly write and consult for a living. And that's, I mean, let's keep it simple there. We'll stop there today. Yeah, I write and consult for a living.
All right. Thank you, Sasha. And then, hey, Nate, how you doing?
Hey, everybody. Hey, Cory. Thanks so much for having me back. So I'm Nate Speare, and I'm an astrologer, a mythologist, a storyteller, and an interdisciplinary experimental performance artist. And it's great to be here. I've been operating under my practice label, Mythopoetic Astrology, for several years. And I sometimes also go by the moniker Weird Astro Body. And yeah, I'm interested in how astrology can sort of provide a window into really cutting edge themes in the zeitgeist right now, like queer ecologies, and also how it reaches into the deep past with folklore and myth, which is really my lineage. So that feels like a good starting point.
Yeah, so rich, this group. So I'm very excited to do some digging in that I did not get to do this past month, or the past like 4 weeks. It was hard to like dig into anything. So wonderful. Thank you again. And we're going to start small with the astrology of the week because people like to get a beat on the week ahead. And I know we can't really isolate the transits, but if we look at some of the things that are happening this week, it might be a nice segue into the bigger transits. We'll see. But so this week, we have Mercury conjoining Chiron and Jupiter in Aries at the top of the week, Mars trining Saturn towards the end of the week, and a first quarter moon in Cancer. And what's striking to me about this week is that Aries ruler Mars just moved into Cancer yesterday on the 25th. So that kind of changes the feel of Aries in general. And that first quarter moon in Cancer with Mars now there on the 28th might, I don't know, unleash an emotional beast or two. Does anyone want to take a stab at the whole Aries Mars in Cancer vibe for the week?
I'll start. Okay. I first want to say, of everybody watching or listening, that you made it. That here we are today. We had a Mars ingress finally going into Cancer, and we just think about the last 30 days and the amount of transits and themes going on. Your favorite IG astrologers made millions of posts every single day. There's been a major transit, and I almost feel like here we get to take a breath finally. And so saying that, this Mercury Chiron story that's happening here officially on this day really just kind of, I think, is a verbalization process of and an expression of the stages of the Chiron story that have happened in the last 3 to 4 weeks. When we go back to the 11th, when we had a Jupiter Chiron conjunction, we had just days before that, we had Moon in Libra that was setting things off, and we went into that weekend, and then several other aspects. So I think here, and I'd like to know what everybody else here thinks about the maybe some of the internal story, the internal wound story with Aries is getting expressed in a new way here.
I found it interesting that right as the conjunction with Mercury and Jupiter is happening in Aries, that you also have the moon moving towards conjoining with Mars in Cancer right after Mars gets in there. And this portion of Cancer right at the beginning is, at least in my mind, associated with beginnings and endings very explicitly. This is the beginning of the Thema Mundi chart in Hellenistic astrology. This is the birth of the rest of the chart from the Cancer point. And so you're looking at Mars moving from what is the very end, at least in some systems of belief around it, to what is just beginning, as well as in the lunar mansion system that I tend to use even more than the 12 solar zodiacal signs now. You have the point where the hunter's head is removed, where an actual death occurs, at least in the Vedic mythological understanding of these particular lunar mansions. So I think not only are you going to see, with this huge emphasis on Mars being triggered by everything happening in Aries, what Mars is going to be doing in Cancer, at least until mid-April, I would say. You're going to get like a concentrated flavor of what that is right at that conjunction point. But also, I think the things represented by the Mercury, Jupiter, or Moon, Mars parts of your chart could have some kind of dramatic and quick ending to them, and a new beginning not long after that. Quick ending, new beginning.
Yeah. Any other thoughts for the Aries Mars thing going on this week?
I mean, I've been seeing it tied into, I think, in this sort of menage a trois to with Venus and Taurus as well. And this expression that keeps coming back to me is the idea of labor of love, right? So Mars and Cancer, we're dealing with labor as Mars being will, being the effort applied of us doing things, right? That spirit that conjures up, rips out of us, and compels us forward through life. And then we have that met by the same idea of Mars and Cancer as the cesarean section, or something ripping forth through the actual midwifing or laborious process in that way as well. And we think about this kind of gentle relationship shared there and supporting what we love, Venus and Taurus, and then as well with the rulership with Jupiter and Mercury and Aries in that conjunction. I just come back to this idea of like the beauty and violence of birth, as necessitating each other, right? The most violent thing that we can experience is the birth. It is a death of a certain life that we had prior to that. And through that process with this hot, viscous ichor, that's like boiling, comes this emergent cry that ushers us forward into something. I don't know what exactly. I'm not going to try and venture to guess too much about that. But for me, there's something that feels so climactic about this arrangement, so much like we are rising on a certain precipice, especially a precipice that maybe we were unconsciously working toward over this gestation and incubation period of Mars in Gemini, where it was formulating within the nexus of the brain. And now it is literally being ushered into the material in a pretty profound way that I think for many of us will also feel slightly out of our control too.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that imagery of the violence of birth and that womb imagery. And it's like, because there's that element of the birth, which is kind of a forward motion and emergence, but then there's also coming with that the association of the feeling of regression into the womb as well, which I've been thinking about. So I feel like, for me, if I were to make sort of an overall comment about this time period, it's sort of like there's this sense of moving forward in ways that are uncomfortable, and because so much of Aries and Mars, right, is about moving forward in different ways. And so, but there's also this element of we're moving forward in ways that are uncomfortable and that can easily bring out these sort of inner beings or, younger selves, ancestral ghosts, spirits, thought forms, complexes that make us feel maybe as though we are regressing sometimes, but that's actually sort of a necessary step or a necessary part of this process of that violent birth that you were just talking about, Sasha. Yeah.
I mean, I think we, by and large, take for granted the forward movement of Mars that you're talking about, but it's going to be that much more pronounced because it's been in such a long retrograde period in Gemini. It's like we might not even normally notice it, but because it's been in this extended retrograde, it's like, oh, now we're moving forward. Now things are being born. So it's almost like through this sense of contrast that we're really seeing it.
Yeah, I can relate to a lot of what everyone's saying. And so we have that going on. And then on the 30th, we also, this is also a pretty intense combination. Sasha was just mentioning Venus. We have a Venus-Uranus conjunction in Taurus. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that, if anyone finds that exciting.
Exciting is a word for that. I think it's fascinating because it was last November on the 8th. The eclipse happened at the same degree here as this Venus-Uranus conjunction that's happening. So we have a continuing story in my mind of the eclipse cycle and the nodes. It started at the end of 2021 in Scorpio and Taurus. We're not completely done with it. This is another chapter in the story. I think here, though, considering the transits are setting this up, even in this, like what we were talking about just before, to setting up the feeling of moving forward, looking at things, seeing the light, moving to the next door, walking through the door here. And I think it's another chapter in the story of how one looks at how they're relating to things, the different ways of doing it. But I really think it's important to not just look at this day, but I would look to the Scorpio and Taurus parts of one's chart and their connection to the eclipses here that we've had as part of the story, part of this movement that I think is happening. So Mars, Saturn on the same day, that's a lot right there. So yeah. So
totally. Yeah, Venus, Uranus always makes me think of the birth of Venus. If we're translating over to the Greek mythology aspect, in terms of if we look back into the myth, this Uranus as the sky god keeps shoving his offspring back into the womb of Gaia because he doesn't have the patience for the imperfection and the messiness of evolution. He'd prefer that the offspring maintain their sort of his perfect image or perfect brilliant glimpse of what they could become. So at a certain point, somebody needs to put a stop to this, and it's Saturn or Kronos who is the one who puts a stop to it, and by cutting off Uranus's genitals, and as the genitals are falling into the sea, out of the foam of their commingling with the ocean emerges Aphrodite, the foam-born goddess. And for me, that myth is always so profound, even if astrologically we don't necessarily connect Uranus all the time, the planet, with the sky god Uranus. It's often more connected with Prometheus, but I still like to always return to that myth of the sky god because I think it's so relevant. I think this just came to me. Uranus and Taurus can sometimes be this aspect of, Taurus is one of the hoarding signs, like a sign that's associated with hoarding. And there's this element sometimes of hoarding ideas. And I think that sometimes Uranus and Taurus it's like hoarding all these ideas until like the nervous system and the brain is like full of air and wind, and but it's like this earthy energy at the same time. And part of that is that Taurus links with values and beauty and what we find beautiful and the ability to discover and realize what our priorities are. And sometimes when there's that hoarding sense of something, we struggle to actually identify like our priorities and say this, not that. So I feel like Venus conjunct Uranus, I always feel like constellates a little bit of that birth of Venus, where Uranus can no longer hoard these images of these glimpses of perfection or visionary brilliance. There has to be a coming into form of beauty, and so perhaps Venus conjunct Uranus involves as well an ability to feel our values and priorities in a more sensual way, in embodied way, at the same time as having a counterbalance of the sort of sublimatio, the sublimation of the Venusian sensual body as well, being brought into the realm of ideas. So that's what I would say.
I love that, Nate. And one of the images that I had been working with originally was the Bride of Frankenstein, and the ways in which the consequences of desire, when reanimated, right, when like brought back into this electrical current, have a pretty powerful influence on like everything from a more mundane experience to the ideas that we see in art and culture. But I think on an individual level, we're playing with something that I wrote about last year for the same transit of Venus with Taurus, and the idea of the Minotaur, right? And in folklore, this concept we see over and over again of this like inhuman chimerical offspring that we see that is usually the child of some witch that has this insatiable appetite, right? And you have to have increasingly miraculous inventions by some Uranian figure to ensnare or entrap that they. I go back to a lot of Eastern European folklore with the otik too, or the otensk, this idea of this strange, like root-like, non-human changeling sort of creature that just eats and eats and eats and eats and starts eating all the people in the building, and then slowly the whole village, right? And it goes on and on and on. And I see some of that as well, like the necessity for invention, for ingenuity that can contain what howls inside of us in a desire to consume. Because I think that for all the beautiful trappings that we see with Venus and Taurus, I think we forget the really bestial and animalic side of Venus and Taurus that like lives to eat and fight, and other words that start with F that we won't do on the radio, right? But like these really embodied physical sensual experiences. And when we get a jolt of electricity to something like that, it's going to wake us up in a certain way. And then what cunning ways do we find in order to like create our own little magic circle that we can't creep outside of and then wreak havoc just because I desire. So those are some of the things that I have been playing with too. And the idea of Victor Frankenstein having to creates this object of desire, right? And then like what happens once the object of desire has been created? How do we wrangle that? How do we keep it under control of some sort?
Woo. Wow. So, okay, I have Venus in Taurus, and your Uranus is coming for my Venus. Probably
we're gonna keep an eye on you, Cory.
I'm super excited now. We're going to dive into some of the more monumental transits of March, and we already touched on this a little bit when we were talking about the week. But Mars in Cancer. So Mars entered Cancer yesterday after 7 months of wreaking havoc in Gemini, or I don't know if I want to be nice, energizing our communications and our cognition. Whatever your experience was, how are we feeling about Mars finally leaving Gemini? And as Mars spends the next several weeks in Cancer, what should we turn our attention to?
As I had mentioned when we were talking about the first conjunction, this portion of Cancer right at the very beginning, the lunar mansion, is related to the hunter Orion. And this is, in Greek mythology, Orion was the hunter who hunted too much and was inevitably punished for it. In Indian mythology, this is the creator deity Brahma in his Prajapati, or the progenitor form, who creates a being who he becomes so excited about this being that he creates, who is embodied speech to his thoughts. Almost the form to his creative impulse. And he becomes so enamored with his creation that he chases her and actually attempts to rape her. And she flees in the form of a deer, and the god Shiva, who is essentially the destroyer deity and the storm god, severs the head of Prajapati and halts him in his tracks and essentially severs one of his heads. And he realizes in this moment that he's gone too far. And with all of this excitement, movement of Mars leaving Gemini and all of this birthing that we've been discussing, I can't help but feel, especially with the beginning of Cancer being so much colored in this way, by the hunter's impulse that many people are going to have the impulse to overhunt. Many are going to have the desire to want to go out and grab and take as much as possible. But it's an important reminder, I think, that the hunter functions best, or I would say in this instance, Mars functions best as the hunter when in a protective mode, when protecting those who are more vulnerable, those who do not have protection. This is the healthiest iteration in my mind of this movement of Mars through this region, which has so much of the ethical dilemmas of the hunter, which is how is one attempting to feed and take care of those who they love and are protecting, and the killing that must occur for that to happen, as well as, when is one going too far? When is one overtaking the forest and overstepping these natural boundaries? I think this dynamic, especially as I mentioned earlier, this all this long retrograde in Gemini, that birthing is going to feel that much more violent, I think, and is going to push people that much more quickly towards kind of impulsive actions. And Mars in Cancer, and it's very marking the flesh, or its soft and hard quality all at once. The danger of this is that much more apparent in my mind.
I'm going to miss Mars and Gemini. I think, for all the transits, whenever Venus and Mars go retrograde, it's always a deeper story. I mean, we always talk about outer body transits and what they do, but sometimes it's not obvious. But when we see Mars or Venus go retrograde, it's obvious, whether it's forward motion or it's retrograde and the aspects it makes. And for that, I'm appreciative of it, because I think as people, and if we recognize this in our charts and stuff, we can work with it, or at least right in front of us to understand it. I almost feel like in long transits like this, at the end, after it moves forward and it gets to the end, it's like, okay, I just get the hang of this. I'm doing this. And then it's going to ingress into the next sign. It's like, well, wait a second. So for me, I'm going to miss it in that sense. I think a good thing right off the bat with Mars and Cancer making a trine with Saturn and Pisces is it's great when you have malefics that are vibing with each other, at least the attempt to, especially in emotional spaces and emotional signs. And I think here that's a way to look at it. Like, you're coming out of a major cycle with Mars and Gemini, but you're going into Cancer. But right off the bat, Saturn and Mars want to work together in a watery place, not in your head. It's not in your head anymore. It's somewhere else. It's embodied, and it sets up the transit, and it actually sets up a longer, story too, gives some oomph to the Saturn and Pisces story. So that's something I just wanted to mention, there, but I'm going to miss it being in Gemini.
Well, that's what.
I think that.
How dare you?
I think Nicholas is our honorary, do you have a Gemini stellium or something like
Sun,
that?
Mercury, Venus.
Okay.
Oh, wow. I'm also Venus in Gemini, so I can appreciate Mars in Gemini. No, those are really great points. And I feel like I resonate to what was said about Mars in Cancer as protector. There's almost a sense where Mars in Cancer, the warrior and nurturer sort of combine, the warrior as nurturer, the nurturer as a fierce warrior as well. And this also reminds me of, I'm not about defining the planets along gender lines or anything. However, Mars in Cancer does bring to mind, clients that I've had and people that I've known who are mask presenting or who are cis men, who have a Mars in Cancer placement, but have not had the opportunity to be seen in that way, in that capacity, that is to say, for the nurturer that they are, for the sort of sensitive, empathic protector that they are, and the grief that they experience around, looking at their kid, at their child, and loving their child, but then the grief over, oh wait, my dad wasn't there, and how they haven't had the opportunities to kind of ask for help and support around that pain. So I'm just offering this as I think Mars in Cancer can be a ripe opportunity to ask for that kind of help around the grief that's not talked about for cis men and mask presenting people, and for everybody as well. That's something I've been thinking about a lot with Mars in Cancer. And also Mars in Cancer, well, yeah, there's there's so much, but actually I'll pause there.
Well, go ahead, Sasha.
I was just going to say, I love that in my Mars in Cancer piece that I released the other day, there was an emphasis too, of course, on this huntress component, right? On the protectress there too. But I also think that when we start to factor in things like how dignity might affect something, right? Or debility might affect something, and we think about the role of Mars, one of the things that really arose for me was the idea of this being a Mars that gets things done in different ways too. We can't just always shoot the arrow directly. For me, Mars in Cancer feels much more like an assassin or a mercenary who's got the crescent moon sickle and is ready to slice a throat from behind, but always with this undetectable, quiet nature until, quite frankly, it's too late. And it also led me to think about a lot of the Cancer Mars natives that I know. And all of them might be aggressive or sort of in certain ways, but are actually often finding very different ways to resolve conflict that don't involve facing it head on. And a lot of the times that manifests in more seductive ways of engaging with things as well, whether that is charming someone out of their mood or being able to like distract you or guide you into somewhere else. So I started associating the ghost light, faux fillet, will-o'-the-wisp sort of phenomena too, of like, oh, you don't know where you're going, but all of a sudden you've been seduced into this different world, in a layer where there's more comfort for that Cancer Mars native to work. So I'm really interested to see how that plays out within the context of the astro weather writ large for everyone. But going back to something that Nicholas was talking about, I'm really excited for this connection between, this trine, this like actual supportive nature of some sort between Saturn and Mars, because when we look at a lot of the mythology and the folklore, there's usually an enemy related dynamic there going on, right? There's often conflict. But for me, this showed up, and my term for Mars in Cancer is the Knight of Pearls, like knight with a K. And then for Saturn, it's the Hell's Fishmonger dynamic. And for me, it feels like Mars is showing up as the Knight of Pearls, as the champion of the king who's Hell's Fishmonger, Saturn and Pisces. There's someone who's going to battle for, right? I refer to it to the executioner of dreams in two ways, because we are executing something, we are putting a plan into motion, but also because of the capacity to assassinate or kill or destroy something as well. So Mars is doing some of that labor for Saturn and Pisces, which has such a gravitas and a pouring overness that it is harder to concentrate on the specific or the deliberate or the intentional in that way.
And yeah, and so we've already started to pull in the next big, everyone's been talking about Saturn's ingress into Pisces. Like we've all, or anyone who follows astrology. And speaking of Hell's Fishmonger, I just want to read a little bit just a tiny bit from Sasha's offering on Saturn in Pisces astrology, just because it's so evocative.
Embarrassed.
Just a little bit, Sasha. And so here's just this little bit from Hell's Fishmonger and his Antimatter Fountain, which is Guide to Saturn in Pisces Astrology. We must make ourselves strange and alien if we wish to evolve to survive what would purportedly be considered unsurvivable. When we cannot see, we must feel. When we cannot breathe, we must recognize how to quiet ourselves into stasis. We must not waste oxygen with pointless words or ideas, which only further pressurize us into unnavigable realms of chaos, unless, of course, we are choosing that with intention. We must learn how to exist in the same galaxy as the antimatter fountain, whose relentless purge of positrons could extinguish the flames of our star selves with the vacuous ease of one simply fulfilling their private destiny. This is no small task, and it is no small ask. And yet, Saturn is famous for asking from us the sacrifices, the adjustments, the compromises necessary in order to build a legacy which survives all of our greatest shipwrecks, even if that means being remembered via the discovery of your sunken treasure decades after your death. And when I read that piece, it was a really like embodied sense for me of Saturn in Pisces. I really felt myself like down, leagues beneath the sea, and like swimming through the wreckage and like identifying all these artifacts. And I just wanted to share that because anyone who's like looking to like kind of feel, I would definitely read Sasha's work. And so what's most, I don't know, what's most interesting? I did a bit of a thing on Saturn and Pisces. What is interesting for y'all about either Saturn and Pisces or this idea of the Saturn Neptune era coming up or that we're in?
I want to say here that the last line that you read of Sasha's piece is fascinating to me because it's, if we're talking about Pisces, like coming full circle, it goes through this whole thing and the emotions and the journey, which Sasha through the words, it's pretty intense and shows everything I think of what life is. But then they come back into the discovery at the end of sunken treasure, or generations find later, but really what one finds later with themselves, let's say from the beginning to an end of a transit. So I just want to point that out. That last line really stuck with me. And for anybody listening, if you're worried about the way it's going to flow in your chart or Saturn Pisces, like there is that at the end. Like there always is some graduation level stuff with Saturn. If you make it to the end, it's hard to see. But when we're dealing with deep emotional content and stories and darkness and all types of things, I really like that last line, Sasha. So
Thank you.
Yeah, you gotta have it's. If you could see, you gotta see that hope. That treasure is there at the end. With any Saturn transit, I tell my clients this, it's the ability to work with whatever temporary rule sets that are brought your way. Let's say in this case, in the Pisces part of the chart, but in the end, it's Saturn gets that rap. I love Saturn, by the way. It gets its bad rap, right? Rightfully so. We're dealing with mortality and fear and time, but there is that treasure. That's for sure.
That reminds me of a mentor that I had who used to say, even if you're a weak diver, never cease to believe that there's a precious pearl at the bottom of the ocean that is your journey, that is your dive. Mm-hmm. And I also love, that image of the discovery of the sunken treasure. And I think you also, Sasha, used the phrase dead dreams at a certain point in that piece. And that really stared me in the face.
Oh yeah, the dreams of the cemetery, the ocean is a cemetery full of the dreams of the dead.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that really lit up for me. Because, well, it reminded me of a personal story when I was a kid and I had to go to the dentist and I was in like terrible tooth pain. Teeth also connect with Saturn, right? So, in the dentist's chair, and I remember the dentist telling me, we have to find out if this tooth is alive and sick or if it's dead.
Sometimes it's better when it's dead too.
It's better when it's dead. Sometimes it's better when it's dead. Yeah. So I thought like, which of our dreams are alive and are actually alive and sick, and what is a dead dream? And there's power in Saturn's clarity of knowing what is a dead dream, because what does it mean for a dream to be dead? Well, then it can go through a kind of transformation and rejuvenation, resurrection kind of process and transform into something else. Right. Whereas, if it's a dream that's still very much alive, then maybe it needs to be redirected in a new context, or I don't know. But in any case, there's something to that metaphor. Yeah. So
this is,
thank you for
yeah.
that.
No, I think it's an important point, and we'll probably touch on this maybe when we get into Pluto moving into Aquarius. But I think a lot of the dead dreams are dead dreams of technology in this instance. I'm very much working from this sidereal paradigm with the lunar mansions. So Saturn's movement through the beginning of tropical Pisces is actually right along the stars of Aquarius. And Aquarius and the mythology around Aquarius is very much canal building and irrigation for fields. The movement of water, we're talking about structuring, whether it's even with the both malefics and water signs, but Saturn in particular, the structuring and movement of liquid in this way, or we could even say electricity, of course. And how does one deal with structuring liquid or non-solid things? And the first lunar mansion in Pisces in the Vedic system is called Shatabhishak, and it's the sort of the realm of the old gods who have been banished by the new gods, and this sort of like Luciferian Silicon Valley dream that many of us have been living in for, I don't know what, the past 15, 20 years now. I think Saturn's movement into Pisces, as well as Pluto into Aquarius, is going to be more and more and more of a questioning of this, and what elements of this dream have died and are necessary to let go and to grieve and to mourn and move on with. And by the time Saturn is about halfway through Pisces, it moves through the next sidereal lunar mansion, which in the Vedic system is called Purva Bhadrapada, which are two stars on the edge of the square of Pegasus, which in many cultures were actually thought to be a kind of funeral cot. So in talking about death once again, Saturn is moving into what in my mind I'm imagining is a kind of crematory structure, where Saturn is the iron and the structure of this vast crematory, and all of these dreams that we're talking about, in particular, I'm thinking of so many of these technological dreams, move into this crematory, and Saturn is, especially in Jupiter-ruled Pisces, the priest or the one who has wisdom to know what to let move into the crematory and let die. This is the priest who knows what to sacrifice so that we can move on into the next era, so that we can move forward. So I think as long as we are embodying Saturn as this kind of priest in Jupiter's sign, I think there's a lot to get into this process of Saturn moving through Pisces. Is like, okay, not just the acknowledgement of what is already dead, but what is in our own lives, what can we intentionally sacrifice? What can we intentionally give to death, as opposed to examining what's already dead?
And then that is a great segue for Pluto moving into Aquarius. And I know that could take like 3 hours in and of itself, but as Pluto made its first ingress into Aquarius on the 23rd, what do you think we'll be getting a little taste of, or a preview of, or it's kind of like a mic check, it's like, hey, can you hear me? I'm about to express.
Well, there was an article I think it was in December of 2022. It was a Popular Mechanics article, and the title was "Is Death Real?" And the article was all about how there were these pigs, I think, and there was this technology that they used to basically bring the pigs back to life after they had been allegedly dead for about 10 minutes or something like that. And so calling into question like sort of tracing the history of the technologies that have been used to prolong life or to kind of help people bounce back from being proclaimed dead or different species and things like that. So I just felt like that was such an on the nose foreshadowing of certain aspects of Pluto and Aquarius, in the sense that part of Aquarius is connected with the mythologies of Prometheus, who is a mythological Titanic figure that is so intertwined with humankind's capacity to survive in different ways. I think even some scholars are quoted as saying Prometheus is the one who caused humanity not to see its own death. And we already live, at least like in the US or in the Western world, this kind of very death negative culture. And so we have to kind of confront the shadows, which Pluto will make us do around the continued denial of death in a lot of ways. Pluto in Aquarius can also either go toward a continued obsession with youth and productivity, and a kind of dissociation, the kind of dissociation from the body and the felt experience that the obsession with youth and productivity can encourage. Or we can make a cultural choice to shift to a paradigm of truly collectively based and communal values that actually includes valuing our elders, which means valuing the process of aging, becoming old and dying, as something that we need to shift into. So I think Pluto in Aquarius will in a holistic sense sort of present us with those choices of values, because Aquarius is also a fixed sign, which means it's linked to what do we value as a species, as a collective. So that's what I'd like to say for the moment. Yeah.
That's interesting, Nate. You started off talking about death, the prolonging of it. I think, if one were to look at, you can see lots of information on the internet from astrologers about what happened in other times of history when Pluto was in Aquarius. The one fundamental thing and theme that I see are schisms and separations. It happened with the Catholic Church and the Greek and the Orthodox Church. It happened then. We have situations where ideals for society, equality and democracy were birthed and put into place, but not fulfilled. You can look at the French Revolution to this. You can look into what's happening with, has equality and democracy been fulfilled for the story of the United States? It's always been the ideal that's put in the forefront. It's not necessarily true. So I think something like a transit like this is going to bring those things to the forefront. And I already see separation and schism within this country politically. And I think it's not going away. I think it actually gets more intense. Now, if we bring in the death part of things, I think it's interesting when we talk about technology and, wanting to prolong death. None of us want to die. Like, we're sick, we want to be cured. But from a personal note, I want to die. I don't want to live forever. It's only the people who want to live forever, and who are driving the technology, they come from the richest privileged class of people. That's the way they look like. They want to prolong it because they don't suffer. Most of us suffer, right? So it's like you have a different way of viewing life and death when you're in that other class structure. When you're in the upper echelons of things, you want to prolong your life forever and sit on your cloud in the mountains looking down at everybody else. Now, it sounds intense, but I think this is part of the story in the world, and especially in the United States, of how the schisms happen, the loss of the middle class. It's because of technology. Now, there's the benefits. We wouldn't be able to do this podcast because of it. But I think here people, do they stand in the line of going along with whatever supposedly is good for you or what has been given to you that's this gift of technology? Or do you just have something in you like, this isn't me. This isn't the way I want to live, because I don't know how much time I have left. So it's like, here's when we get into the organic sense here that you were talking about earlier, Nate, just how we want to deal with each other collectively, how we want to interact with each other, because for most part, it isn't working like it is for the privileged class, So I see that is at the forefront, at least part of the Pluto and Aquarius transit. So,
and on that note, we're going to be talking about this for the next 20 years. We'll be watching it, experiencing it. And I wish we had more time. We didn't even get to all of March. But yes, so this has to come to an end. And that was all four of you had such white hot, amazing takes on March. And I thank you so much. In about 30 seconds each, could you all just leave us with any things you might be up to? Of course, everyone here, their information will be in the show notes and in the archive. Jay, anything coming up?
I just taught a class yesterday with the Golden Dome School. The class will be available to purchase on designing your own lunar interior, whether that be the interior of yourself, your soul, or your home or room, what have you. There's a podcast as well, A Star Night Dwell, and a Patreon for said podcast as well. And yeah, I'd say those are about the main things.
And Nicholas?
I'm all in on YouTube. Sparkles of Gold Astrology on YouTube is my website, sparklesofgold.com. I got my podcast, the Manifesto podcast. It's a couple other things. I just did a major Pluto and Aquarius podcast with Melissa LaFara's podcast with her and Elodie, who's from Ninth House Astrology, and did that. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. And Sasha?
Yeah, Sunday night I'm teaching a class for Spiritus Arcanum on Kalderash witchcraft, a type of Romani witchcraft, and Balkan fairy seership tradition called the Soizmaka or Paralitsa. So you can find that on Sunday via my link tree, where you can find all my other links. And in April, I'll be doing diviners on divining through the Cauldron Black, being hosted by Dr. Alexander Cummins, discussing divination through stellar witchcraft using the stars and the a stellar horary technique I invented specifically for use in ritual and rites.
Great. And Nate?
Great. Well, a great way to find me and engage with me is I do monthly group classes called Weird Astro Bodies every new moon. So I guess the next one will be from this show would be the new moon in Taurus. So find me. That's also on my link tree. You can sign up for my newsletter and get information on how to register for those monthly groups. They're really great. And also stay tuned I'll be offering an opportunity to be in community in a container called Astroerotics, which combines the sort of astrological lens and also self-expression and performance modes into sexological body work and relationship sort of material. So that's another really exciting thing that's coming up for me. So looking forward.
Awesome. Just awesome. Again, I thank all of you so much. And we'll be back next week, same time, same place. Everybody take care and have a great week. The Cosmic Dispatch is a weekly show that uses astrology as a catalyst for conversations with people from all walks of life. An exercise in making astrology an accessible part of your week. You can find out more about my work at www.astrologybycory.com.